Hello, thank you for joining me today and thinking about STEM and the attributes that teachers need in order to deliver effective STEM teaching and learning programs. During this presentation, I'm looking forward to introducing you to Teacher James. We're going to talk about the hydraulics STEM unit that he taught with senior primary students, and we're going to consider James's fluency, where I'm taking to mean fluency as the ability to move seamlessly, be fluent, between scientific, mathematical, technological, and everyday contexts. This concept of fluency was one that we explored here at ASERA 8 years ago when we were looking at using science contexts for teaching science concepts. And at that stage, we talked about fluency as being able to move between the contextual aspects and the scientific concepts. So what might fluency look like in the context of STEM? This is Teacher James. He's an experienced teacher who started off with an interest and a strength in physical education and sport. But over the last 5 years, he'd really done a lot of professional learning in information technology and had become a school leader in this space. And for about 3 years, he'd specifically been teaching STEM, and he'd started that because of some professional learning that he'd done. He was aware of the growing interest in STEM in professional conversations, and he had some boys that he wanted to engage more deeply in their learning. During the year of the research, he was the STEM leader across the primary school. The context for the study is the New Zealand curriculum, which is a very broad curriculum framework. Although science, technology and maths each have their own learning areas, schools are responsible for developing a locally relevant teaching and learning program, and integration between curriculum areas is encouraged. At the school that James was working at, they had implemented something called the Ignite program in year 7 and 8, so that was senior primary school level. And students had the opportunity to choose the Ignite module that they wanted to participate in, and Construct was the module that James was teaching. The Ignite program draws its name as an acronym from a parallel with the technology cycle. So it's very much a technology-focused program, but James saw the potential for bringing in science and maths learning. He is a curious person by nature. He is a learner. He is a risk taker. He's creative in his teaching approaches, and his preferred pedagogy is one of inquiry and conversation. And before starting the unit, James, talking about his pedagogical approach, talked about questioning. He said when it's an inquiry-based thing, the questioning is really, really key to getting them to get those good ideas, trying not to put ideas in their heads or words in their mouths, but trying to get them to come out with it and refining it a bit. So James was very clearly committed to students thinking for themselves and using conversation to prompt and inspire that thinking. He was excited about using hydraulics. He hadn't used hydraulics as a context for teaching and learning before, but he'd come across various sets online and thought that there was a lot of potential for both technology and science learning. So over 7 weeks, the students had 1 day each week, and in the first 2 days of their program, they really focused on the science, so using feed testing to understand how hydraulic systems work. From there, they went on to more of a technology focus where they constructed prototypes and final products. Their task was to build a simple hydraulics machine, but all the way through, there was a very close interweaving of science, technology, and maths. This is an example of how one group represented their FAIR test. So they were exploring the impact of different syringe size on the hydraulic system. But when talking to James, they realised that they had air bubbles. And so they'd inadvertently introduced an additional variable into their system. And this led to discussion about different compressibility of liquids and of gases, about the need to keep the system exactly the same except for the variable you were testing, and so on. Similarly with this FAIR test, here the students were looking at the impact of different tubing length between the different syringes of a system, and they'd very carefully measured the amount of liquid in each system, so trying to keep the amount of liquid the same. But what that meant was that because the tubes were longer, there was actually more air in the systems with the longer tubes. And so again, in conversation with James, they talked about how there were actually two variables that could be having an impact. So reflecting on his practice, James talked about how questioning has to be really, really careful. He talked about how you've got to step back and look at what you're doing. And there have been times when he's walked away and thought, go away, and realised the need to think about what he was saying, think about how he was going to respond, and think about the questions that he was going to ask the students. This is an example of one of the plans that a student group did for a digger that they were going to construct. And here is the planning for a fairly complex three-dimensional arcade game where a claw is used to retrieve a toy. In this case, you've got 3 different scissor lift systems. Here's a three-dimensional maze that was built. In this case, the hydraulic system is sitting in each of the 4 legs of the maze, and you tilt the maze by controlling the hydraulics. Here we've got a prototype on the left-hand side of a simple digger system built out of cardboard, and then the final product built from MDF. So thinking about James and his interactions with the students throughout the unit, it was very evident that James was committed to valuing the students' ideas. He believed that the students could think critically and creatively to resolve their own design problems. He drew on his extensive practical construction knowledge and his own reading and thinking about hydraulic systems. So he talked about how he himself had learned a huge amount of hydraulics through preparing and delivering the unit. Also evident was his rapport with the students, and that there was a high trust classroom environment. And of course that he was able to fluently move between scientific, mathematical, technological, and everyday concepts and processes. So thinking back to teacher attributes, in the context of STEM education, it seemed to us that James was fluent in his ability to move between the different concepts and processes, but he also had the disposition and the willingness to do so. And beyond that, he was able to make shrewd decisions about when to use the different scientific, technological, mathematical, and everyday concepts and processes. And so bringing those together, the fluency, the disposition, and the discernment, we had a sense of what it looks like, or what it could look like, to be an expert STEM educator. In concluding, I want to say that the hydraulics unit was based on an inquiry approach. It took place in the context of a broad curriculum, and it enabled a wide range of conceptual, procedural, and dispositional learning. The student choice increased student engagement and learning, but it required teacher flexibility and confidence. And finally, being privy to the thinking and actions of expert teachers gives valuable insights into effective classroom practice. and this can help inform programs for teacher professional learning and development. Watching James and his students in action provided privileged insights into the wide range of learning that is possible through STEM, the learning conversations that support this, and the teacher knowledge and skills required in order for such learning to occur.